My daughter banned me from the $150,000 Paris wedding I paid for, just because I don't speak French. She emailed, "Your presence will embarrass me in front of my French in-laws." I decided to teach her a lesson. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls. My daughter banned me from attending her wedding in Paris because I don't speak French. So I canceled my $150,000. Imagine this. You raise your daughter alone after your wife passes away. You pay for her education, support her dreams, and then she sends you an email saying you're not sophisticated enough for her wedding. Victoria suggested I watch her ceremony on livestream, because my presence would embarrass her French in-laws. That was the moment this widowed father decided to teach his arrogant daughter about consequences. 1 letter of credit canceled, $150,000 in wedding funds gone. But the money was only the beginning of Victoria's lesson. The fairy tale chateau wedding, the glamorous lifestyle she built for herself, collapsed faster than she ever imagined. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own daughter treats you like you're not worthy enough to witness the most important day of her life? My name is Caspian Wells. I'm 58 years old, a successful business consultant from Denver. And I raised my daughter Victoria practically single-handedly after my wife Catherine passed away 12 years ago. Tuesday morning started like any other. I was up at 7 coffee brewing watching the sunrise paint the Rocky Mountains through my kitchen window. At 58, I'd learned to appreciate these quiet moments. The house felt peaceful, settled. Sarah was already at her design studio. We've been together 2 years now. Nothing dramatic. Just companionship after loss. Victoria, just thinking her name brought a smile to my face. My daughter had exceeded every dream I'd ever had for her. 29 years old, a respected French translator, fluent in 3 languages. After Catherine died, Victoria became my whole world. Every sacrifice, every late night working to pay for her education, it had all been worth it. Her engagement to John Baptiste filled me with pride. A successful French investment banker who clearly adored her. The wedding planning had been a joy to watch from a distance. Parachute set a chateau overlooking the Seine. When she'd asked for financial help, I hadn't hesitated. $150,000 seemed like a small price for my daughter's happiness. I had already transferred $80,000 for deposits. The final $70,000 was scheduled to go out next week. My phone chimed with an email notification. Victoria's name appeared in the sender field, no subject line, which was unusual for her. I opened it expecting a wedding update. Instead, I found this. Dad, John Baptiste family has made it clear. They don't want you at the wedding since you don't speak French. They think it would be embarrassing having someone who can't participate in conversations. It's better if you just watch the live stream from home. We've set up a Google Meet link, so you can still see everything. Should be just like being there. The financial arrangements remain the same. Obviously. I stared at the screen reading those words over and over. My daughter had just banned me from her wedding because I wasn't French enough, not sophisticated enough, not worthy enough to sit in the same room as her new family, but my money that was still welcome. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Should be just like being there. As if watching my daughter's wedding through a computer screen was the same as walking her down the aisle. As if 12 years of single parenting could be reduced to a live stream viewer. The irony was devastating. Victoria made her living helping people communicate across language barriers. Yet she was using my inability to speak French as a weapon to exclude me from the most important day of her life. My hands didn't tremble. I didn't shout or throw the phone. Instead, something cold and final settled in my chest. This wasn't stress or nerves. This was calculated humiliation delivered with surgical precision by the daughter I'd sacrificed everything for. I thought about all those years working overtime to pay for her education, all those French lessons, language camps, study abroad programs. The pride I'd felt when she became successful. Had I been funding my own eventual rejection? The morning sun still streamed through the windows, but everything felt different. Now the coffee had gone cold in my cup, or maybe that was just the chill spreading through my chest. I set the phone down carefully and stared at the mountains. 12 years of devoted single parenting. And this was my reward, being told I was too American, too unsophisticated, too embarrassing to witness my own daughter's wedding. But my checkbook was still invited. As I read her words one final time, something fundamental died inside me. The father who would do anything for his child was still there, but he just learned the difference between being loved and being used. Couldn't stop staring at that email. Every word felt like a calculated slap. Each phrase designed to cut deeper than the last Sean Baptist family has made it clear. They don't want you at the wedding since you don't speak French. Not, we wish you could learn some French. Not, maybe we can arrange a translator. They simply didn't want me there. My own daughter had allowed her future in-laws to exclude me based on language, something I'd never had the privilege of learning, because I had been too busy working to support her dreams. They think it would be embarrassing having someone who can't participate in conversations embarrassing. That word hit me like a physical blow. I was an embarrassment to my own daughter, the man who had raised her alone, who had sacrificed weekends and vacations to pay for her education. I was now too embarrassing to be seen at her wedding. The cultural discrimination was breathtaking in its cruelty. Here I was, a successful American businessman, who had built a thriving consulting firm, from nothing, being dismissed as unsophisticated, because I spoke only English. My grandfather had immigrated to this country with hope and determination. My father had served in Vietnam. I'd created jobs, paid taxes, raised a daughter who became everything I dreamed she could be. But none of that mattered to the Moreau family. I wasn't French, so I wasn't worthy. I walked to my home office and opened the wedding expense spreadsheet I'd been maintaining. The numbers stared back at me in black and white: venue deposit $35,000, paid catering. Advance $25,000, paid photography retainer $12,000, paid floral arrangements $8,000, paid total already transferred $80,000, remaining balance to $70,000. Grand total $150,000. $150,000 for my daughter's perfect day. The same daughter who had just told me I wasn't sophisticated enough to attend. The financial arrangements remained the same, obviously, as if my continued financial support was a given, regardless of how they treated me. As if being excluded from my own daughter's wedding wouldn't affect my willingness to pay for it. Victoria wanted my money, but not my presence. She was perfectly happy to have her embarrassing American father fund her European fairy tale, as long as he stayed home, where the Moreaus wouldn't have to see him. But the cruelest irony was yet to come. I opened my laptop and pulled up Victoria's professional website, something I'd helped her create when she started her translation business, bridging language barriers to bring people together. Specializing in French, English, corporate communications, helping businesses and families connect across cultures. I read it twice, the bitter irony burning in my throat. My daughter made her living bridging language gaps. Her entire career was built on the principle that language differences shouldn't divide people, that communication barriers could be overcome with patience and understanding. She helped strangers connect across cultural divides every single day. Yet she had just used my inability to speak French as grounds for excluding me from the most important day of her life. Victoria Wells, professional bridge builder, had just burned the most important bridge she'd ever had, the one connecting her to the father who had made everything possible. The woman who helped other families connect across cultures had just disconnected from her own father because he wasn't cultured enough for her new family's standards. Closed the laptop and stared out the window. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about respect, dignity, and the realization that I had raised someone who could separate love from convenience with surgical precision. My daughter, the bridge builder, had just shown me exactly where I stood in her priorities. I was good enough to fund her dreams, but not sophisticated enough to witness them. As the full weight of her hypocrisy settled over me, I understood something with painful clarity. Victoria had never seen me as her father. She had seen me as her bank account. I sat in my study staring at Catherine's photograph on the bookshelf. 12 years had passed since I'd lost her, but her presence still filled this room. She'd chosen every book on these shelves, picked out the leather chair where I now sat, wrestling with the hardest decision I had faced since her funeral. What would Catherine think of what Victoria had become? My wife had been a teacher, patient and kind, but she'd never tolerated disrespect. I remembered when Victoria was 8, rolling her eyes at a restaurant server who accidentally brought the wrong order. Catherine had made Victoria apologize, then explained something I'd never forgotten. "Sweetheart," she'd said, "how we treat people says everything about who we are. Kindness isn't optional. It's what makes us human." Catherine had raised Victoria with those values: respect for others, regardless of their background or circumstances. Appreciation for the people who helped us along the way. Gratitude for the sacrifices others made on our behalf. Where had those lessons gone? I picked up Catherine's photo, remembering how she'd worried about spoiling Victoria after her diagnosis. Don't let guilt make you weak, Caspian. She'd whispered during one of her final hospital stays. Love her. But don't let her become entitled. She needs to understand that respect is earned, not given. Had I failed her? Had my grief over losing Catherine made me too permissive with Victoria? Had I confused love with enabling mistaken generosity for good parenting? The guilt was crushing. Maybe Victoria's behavior was my fault. Maybe I'd created this monster by never saying no, never setting boundaries, never demanding the respect Catherine had insisted upon. But then I thought about Catherine's reaction to Victoria's email. My wife would have been appalled. She would have seen through the manipulation, immediately recognized the calculated cruelty for what it was. Catherine had never accepted disrespect from anyone, not from difficult parents. At school, not from rude strangers, and certainly not from our daughter. You're not doing her any favors by accepting this. I could almost hear Catherine saying, you're teaching her that love means being a doormat. The internal war raged on. Part of me wanted to swallow the humiliation, pay for the wedding, and hope that somehow Victoria come to her senses after the ceremony. Maybe she'd realize what she'd done. Maybe she'd apologize. But the stronger part of me, the part that had learned from Catherine's strength, knew better. This wasn't about punishment. This was about teaching a lesson that should have been learned years ago. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. She had been quietly supportive through the morning's revelation, never pushing, never trying to influence my decision. That restraint meant everything to me. She asked, setting a cup on my desk. Catherine always said that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's worst behavior. I said, still holding her photograph. Sarah nodded. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, and she'd be horrified by what Victoria's become. The truth hit me with startling clarity. I wasn't betraying Catherine's memory by setting boundaries with Victoria. I was honoring it. My wife had tried to teach our daughter about respect and gratitude. By accepting Victoria's treatment, I was undoing everything Catherine had worked to instill. Catherine would want me to stand up for myself. She'd want me to show Victoria that actions have consequences, that respect isn't negotiable, that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. I set the photograph back on the shelf and looked at Sarah. I know what I need to do. What's that? Something Catherine would have done 12 years ago if she'd lived to see this. The decision crystallized with surprising peace. This wasn't about anger or revenge. This was about dignity, self-respect, and honoring the values Catherine had tried to teach us both. Victoria had made her choice when she sent that email. She'd chosen her new family's approval over her father's dignity. She'd chosen financial exploitation over genuine relationship. Now, it was my turn to choose. As I sat there, Catherine's wisdom flowing through me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, absolute certainty about what needed to be done. Thursday afternoon, I walked into the Wells Fargo Private Banking Center downtown. The marble floors and mahogany panels felt different today. I wasn't here as a grateful client. I was here as a man reclaiming his dignity. Mr. Wells, Charles Morrison, rose from behind his desk. We've done business together for 15 years. He'd helped structure my consulting firm's finances and handled international transactions for my clients. Charles, I need your help with something urgent. Can I do for you? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. I need to cancel the letter of credit we established for Victoria's wedding vendors in Paris. Charles blinked, clearly surprised. The one guaranteeing payments to the chateau and catering services, that's quite substantial to cancel. May I ask what's changed? The circumstances have changed. I need it cancelled immediately. Charles pulled up the account on his computer. Let me review. Yes, here it is. $150,000 in total commitments. We've already processed $80,000 in payments to various vendors. I understand. I want the remaining $70,000 guarantee revoked. Mr. Wells, you understand, this will immediately void all pending contracts with the Paris vendors. They'll receive automatic notification that the payment guarantee has been withdrawn. That's exactly what I want. Charles leaned back, studying my face. In 15 years of business, he'd learned to read my moods. This is quite unusual for you. You've always been extremely generous with family matters. Sometimes generosity becomes enabling, Charles. I've learned the difference. He nodded slowly. We can execute this immediately. The letter of credit hasn't reached its payment deadlines yet. You're about 10 days ahead of when vendors would expect final transfers. Perfect timing. Victoria would have no warning. No chance to scramble for alternative funding. What about my legal exposure? None whatsoever. Charles assured me, "You were the guarantor, not the contracting party. Your daughter and her fiancé are the actual parties to these vendor agreements. When we revoke the guarantee, vendors will contact them directly about payment. And if they can't pay, the contracts become void. Venues get released, services get cancelled. Standard international business practice." I felt calm satisfaction settle over me. This was an emotional revenge. This was a calculated business decision. I was withdrawing financial support from people who had made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision?" Charles asked, fingers poised over the keyboard. "Once I execute, it's immediate and irreversible." I thought about Victoria's email about being told I was too embarrassing to attend my own daughter's wedding, about the casual cruelty of should be just like being there. I've never been more certain about anything in my life. For 20 minutes, I signed papers and provided verbal authorizations. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd given away too freely. The process was surprisingly simple, just paperwork that would unravel months of wedding planning. "It's done," Charles said finally, printing confirmation documents. "All vendors will receive notification within the hour. The letter of credit is officially revoked." I stood and shook his hand. "Thank you, Charles. I appreciate your discretion always. And for what it's worth, sometimes the hardest business decisions are the right ones." As I walked out of the bank, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the quiet power that comes from refusing to be used. Victoria had taught me that respect was negotiable. I was about to teach her that, so was my financial support. The wheels were in motion. In 10 days, when the payment deadline arrived and no money appeared, Victoria would learn what it felt like to face consequences for her choices. The next 10 days passed with surreal normalcy. I went to work, attended meetings, had dinner with Sarah, maintained my regular routine. But underneath the surface, I carried a quiet anticipation that felt both foreign and strangely liberating. Victoria called every day, completely unaware of what I'd done. The following Tuesday, 5 days after my visit to the bank, she called with her usual excitement. "Dad, you won't believe how beautiful the chateau looks." She gushed. "The Flores showed us the arrangements yesterday, and they're absolutely stunning." John Baptist's mother actually teared up when she saw them. I made appropriate sounds of interest, letting her paint pictures of a wedding I'd never see funded by money that would never arrive. Wednesday brought updates about the photographer. "He's flying in from Milan," she continued. "He's done work for French Vogue. Can you believe it? My wedding in Vogue-level photography. That sounds wonderful," I replied, my voice steady. By Thursday she was discussing the menu. 5 courses, Dad. The chef trained under Daniel Bullitt. Jean-Baptiste says it's the kind of meal that makes people remember a wedding forever. It certainly would be memorable though, not for the reasons she imagined. The dramatic irony was almost unbearable. Victoria was planning every detail of her perfect day, completely oblivious that the financial foundation supporting it had been quietly removed. She spoke with such confidence, such certainty, that everything would unfold exactly as she envisioned. Friday's call included the crucial detail. "The final payment goes through Monday," she mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather. "Then it's just 2 more weeks until the big day." Monday. The day vendors would discover no payment was coming. That same Friday afternoon, Brad Harrison stopped by my office, settling into the chair across from my desk with the familiarity of 30 years of friendship. "You seem different lately," he observed, studying my face, calmer, somehow, more settled. "Do I like you've made peace with something that was bothering you?" Paused. "Everything with Victoria's wedding." I chose my words carefully. "Everything's exactly as it should be." Brad raised an eyebrow. He'd known me long enough to recognize when I was being deliberately vague. "That's an interesting way to put it. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that restore balance," I said. He nodded slowly, not pressing for details, but understanding that something significant was happening. "Whatever it is, it suits you. You look like a man who's found his backbone again." That weekend, 9 days after canceling the letter of credit, Victoria called with final details. The excitement in her voice was infectious, even knowing what I knew. "John Baptist's entire family is flying in from land," she said. 37 people. "They're so sophisticated, Dad. You'd love meeting them, but how it is with the language thing." Actually, I knew exactly how it was. Sunday evening, I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Tomorrow, the vendors would expect their final payments. Tomorrow, Victoria's perfect world would begin to crack. I felt no guilt, no second thoughts. Just a deep sense of brightness like a compass needle finally pointing true north. Sarah joined me with 2 glasses of wine. "Penny, for your thoughts, just thinking about lessons." I said, "How sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices." She squeezed my hand gently. "Your daughter is going to learn something important soon, isn't she?" Monday morning, exactly 10 days after my visit to Wells Fargo arrived crisp and clear. I made my coffee, read the news, prepared for another normal day at the office. But this wasn't a normal day. This was the day Victoria would discover that actions have consequences. That respect isn't optional, and that her father wasn't the pushovers she'd believed him to be. Somewhere in Paris, vendors were checking their accounts and finding them empty. The phone would ring soon. Call came Wednesday morning. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. 2 days had passed since the payment deadline. Exactly the time frame Charles had predicted for vendor reactions. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Dad." Victoria's voice was strained, higher pitched than usual. "I need to talk to you. Something's wrong with the wedding payments." "What kind of wrong?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "The chateau called this morning. They said they haven't received the final payment. But that's impossible. You guaranteed everything, right? They're threatening to cancel our booking." I leaned back in my chair. "Did they say anything else?" "The caterer called too, and the photographer." "Dad, they're all saying the same thing. No payment received. They're talking about canceling everything." Her voice cracked with panic. "This has to be some kind of banking error. Have you checked with John Baptist? Maybe there's been a miscommunication." "He's in meetings all morning, Dad. I need you to call the bank right now. Fix this, please." The desperation in her voice was palpable. For the first time since sending that cruel email, Victoria needed her father. Not as money. Well, actually exactly as money, but she needed him to solve her problem. "Victoria, I think there's something you should know. What Dad just called the bank. You can talk later. Dad has canceled the letter of credit." Silence. Complete absolute silence. What her voice was barely a whisper. "I revoke the payment guarantee. The vendors have been notified that no further payments will be coming from me." "You can't do that. The wedding is in 2 weeks. I can, and I did." "But why, Dad? This is my wedding. You promised." "I promised to pay for a wedding. I was invited to attend. You uninvited me. Remember? You told me I was too embarrassing for your new family. That's not. We can fix that. You can come, Dad. Please. You have to fix this." Interesting how quickly her position changed when money was involved. "Victoria, the decision is final. This is because of Sarah, isn't it?" Her voice turned sharp, desperate. "You're choosing that woman over your own daughter. This has nothing to do with Sarah. This is about respect. I'm your daughter. You are. You told me I wasn't sophisticated enough to witness your wedding. You reduced me to a live stream viewer, while expecting me to fund your perfect day." I could hear her crying now. The reality of her situation finally sinking in. "Sean Baptist is going to kill me." She sobered. His family is going to be so angry." She was right about that. The next call came Friday afternoon. This time Victoria's voice was hollow, defeated. "It's over," she said. Simply, what's over? Everything. The engagement, the wedding. John Baptist's mother called an emergency family meeting yesterday. She said the Wells family has proven to be unreliable, financially unstable. They're calling off the wedding. I felt a moment of surprise. I had expected consequences, but not this swift or complete. "And John Baptist," he said, "he can't marry into a family that embarrasses his relatives. He said you humiliated them by pulling funding at the last minute." Her laugh was bitter. "Funny how it's your fault, not mine. What about the money you have saved?" $8,000, Dad. I have $8,000. The chateau alone costs $85,000. I lived off your generosity for so long. I never learned to save properly." The admission hung between us like a confession. "Sean Baptist returned the ring yesterday." She continued, her voice flat, "via messenger. He couldn't even face me. His mother sent a note saying the Morrow family cannot associate with people of questionable character and reliability. I'm sorry, it ended this way." "Victoria, are you? Because you got exactly what you wanted. You destroyed my wedding, my engagement, my future." "I didn't destroy anything. I simply stopped paying for my own exclusion." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I hate you," she whispered, then hung up. I set the phone down and stared at my office window. In less than a week, Victoria had lost her wedding, her fiancé, and her illusions about unconditional financial support. She'd learned that actions have consequences. It was a lesson 12 years overdue. The fallout was swift and merciless. Within days of Victoria's engagement being called off, my phone began ringing with calls from extended family. Word traveled fast: a cancelled wedding, a broken engagement, and the daughter who had excluded her own father. My sister Margaret called first. Caspian, I heard about Victoria's wedding. What happened? I gave her the facts. Victoria had uninvited me due to language barriers. I had withdrawn financial support. The wedding collapsed. She uninvited you from your own daughter's wedding. Margaret's voice rose in disbelief. After everything you've done for her. That's correct. Good for you for standing up to her. That girl has been spoiled rotten since Catherine died. Similar conversations followed with cousins, aunts, and family friends. The universal reaction was shocked at Victoria's behavior and support for my decision. Holiday invitations that would normally include Victoria quietly stopped coming. Family gatherings continued without her. Victoria's professional life began cracking too. The translation industry in Denver was smaller than people realized, and word of family instability spread among corporate clients. My business associate Robert Martinez mentioned it casually. Caspian, we heard there were personal issues affecting Victoria's reliability. We're reconsidering our contract with her firm. What kind of issues? Family drama affecting professional commitments? Clients are nervous about instability. I didn't defend her. Victoria had made her choices. The financial reality hit hardest. Victoria had lived so comfortably off my subsidies that she'd never learned proper budgeting. Her apartment rent alone was $2,800 monthly, manageable, when Dad quietly covered half impossible on translator income alone. 2 weeks after our last conversation, Victoria showed up at my office building. Security called. She was in the lobby asking to see me. Tell her I'm unavailable. She says it's urgent. Mr. Wells' family emergency? Tell her to make an appointment through proper channels. That evening she appeared at my house sitting on my front steps for 2 hours. I stayed at Sarah's that night. The desperate emails began arriving daily. Dad, please call me. I know I made mistakes, but we're family. I'm losing clients because of this situation. I can't afford my apartment anymore. I need help. I'm sorry about the wedding invitation. I was wrong. Each email revealed her deteriorating situation. The entitled young woman who had casually excluded her father was discovering life without his financial safety net. But the manipulative emails bothered me. Most mom would want us to work this out. You're destroying our family over one mistake. Sarah has poisoned you against your own daughter. These attempts to weaponize Catherine's memory and blame Sarah only strengthened my resolve. Victoria still didn't understand this was about her behavior, not external influences. The final attempt came 3 weeks after the collapse. Victoria cornered me in my office parking lot. Dad, please, I'm desperate. She looked at thinner, tired, wearing old clothes instead of expensive outfits. I lost 3 major clients this week. I can't make rent. I can't afford groceries. I know I hurt you, but I'm your daughter. You are my daughter. I raised you to treat people with respect and gratitude. You chose to do neither. I was wrong about the wedding. I admit it. But this punishment has gone too far. This isn't punishment, Victoria. These are consequences. There's a difference. What's the difference? Punishment is something I do to you. Consequences are something you do to yourself. She stared at me. Tears streaming. So that's it. You're just gonna let me lose everything. You already lost everything that mattered. The rest is just money and convenience. I walked away, leaving her in the parking lot. As I drove home, I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, but no guilt either. Victoria was learning what independence actually cost. It was a lesson 12 years overdue. The daughter who had made her living, bridging cultural gaps, had burned the most important bridge of all, the one connecting her to the father who had made everything possible. 6 months later, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my bedroom window. The morning light felt different, somehow softer, more peaceful. At 58, I'd learned that true contentment comes not from avoiding difficult decisions, but from making the right ones, even when they hurt. Victoria and I hadn't spoken since that parking lot confrontation. Through the family grapevine, I'd heard she'd moved to a smaller apartment across town, was slowly rebuilding her client base, and had taken a part-time job at a language learning center to make ends meet. She was learning what financial independence actually meant the hard way. but perhaps the only way that would stick. I felt no satisfaction in her struggles. But no guilt either. That wasn't entirely true. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes wondered if I'd failed her in a different way years ago. Maybe I had spoiled her too much after Catherine died, letting guilt over her mother's death turned me into a pushover instead of a parent. Maybe if I'd set boundaries earlier, taught her gratitude and respect when she was younger, none of this would have happened. But dwelling on past mistakes wouldn't change anything. Victoria was 29 years old enough to understand that actions have consequences, old enough to learn from them. Sarah and I had grown closer through all of this. She never once suggested I reconcile with Victoria, never pushed me to fix the relationship. Instead, she'd simply supported my decision to maintain boundaries. That restraint, that respect for my choices meant everything to me. "You're different now," she told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains, gold more settled. "Like you found something you'd lost." She was right. I had found something: my self-respect. For 12 years after Catherine's death, I'd confused love with enabling mistaken generosity for good parenting. I had been so afraid of losing Victoria that I had never demanded she treat me with basic human dignity. The business was thriving without the constant drain of Victoria's emergencies and urgent needs. I've been able to focus on growing my consulting practice. Clients respected the way I'd handled my personal situation. Word had gotten around about my principled stand, and it had actually enhanced my professional reputation. Brad Harrison stopped by the office regularly, and he'd noticed the change too. "What I admire about what you did," he said during one of our lunch meetings, "you didn't do it in anger. You did it with dignity. That's the difference between revenge and justice." He was right. This had never been about hurting Victoria. It had been about teaching her that respect isn't optional, that love doesn't mean accepting abuse, and that financial support comes with the expectation of basic human decency. The extended family had rallied around my decision completely. Holiday gatherings were actually more peaceful without Victoria's drama and entitled attitude. My sister Margaret had put it best: "Caspian, you didn't lose a daughter. You stopped enabling someone who was using you." Sometimes I wondered if Victoria had learned anything from this experience. I hoped she had, but I couldn't control that. I could only control my own choices, my own boundaries, my own self-respect. People often asked if I missed her. The honest answer was complicated. I missed the daughter. I'd raised the little girl who used to practice French at our kitchen table. But I didn't miss the entitled young woman who had treated me like a bank account with legs. If Victoria ever genuinely changed, if she ever developed real gratitude, real respect, real understanding of what she'd done, maybe we could have a relationship again someday, but it would have to be on terms of mutual respect, not financial dependence. As I sat in my study that evening, looking at Catherine's photograph, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete peace with my decisions. I hadn't destroyed my daughter's wedding. I had simply stopped paying for my own exclusion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes the most important lesson a parent can teach is that respect isn't negotiable, not even from family, especially not from family. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. Sometimes life teaches us the hardest lessons through the people we love most. Caspian's story reminds us that true love sometimes means setting boundaries even with family. As it says in Proverbs, "Whoever spares the rod hates his child, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." God gives us wisdom to know when generosity becomes enabling, when kindness becomes weakness. This betrayal story isn't just about a father and daughter. It's about the universal struggle between unconditional love and conditional respect. Like many grandpa stories passed down through generations, it carries timeless wisdom about dignity and self-worth. Our grandfathers understood something we've forgotten: respect isn't negotiable, not even from those we've sacrificed everything for. In betrayal stories like this, we see how financial manipulation can destroy the most sacred bonds. But we also see redemption, not through reconciliation, but through self-respect. God doesn't call us to be doormats. He calls us to love wisely, as Scripture teaches above all else. Guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. The most profound grandpa stories often end not with happy reunions but with hard-won peace. Caspian learned what his own grandfather knew. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their choices. God blesses those who choose dignity over desperation, boundaries over enabling. What's your take on Caspian decision? Have you ever had to choose between family, loyalty, and self-respect? Share your thoughts below. Hit that subscribe button for more powerful stories. And let us know, was he right to cancel the wedding funding?